Good morning, Catherine. You're there with us.
Good morning, Jens. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us all the way from Geneva. So I want to welcome you all, both you that are here in the room, but also those that are attending online, to this launch event of this global report on greening enterprises, transforming workplaces, processes and workplaces. So we have people here today from government, we have people from employers and business member organizations, trade unions, academia, and research institutions, and we have some fellow UN agencies, and some of my ILO colleagues have also decided to join us today, so thank you for that. We have educators in the room. So also thank and welcome to the online participants. I think if one thing COVID has showed us, it's that these hybrid events are probably here to stay, and I think it's also a very nice way to have a more sustainable event, because with all participants joining online, the carbon footprint is lower. We don't think of all the people here who got into their car today to drive to this event. We don't have to make food for you online. I'm sorry about that. I'm sure you, and so on and so forth. So we are excited to have you here for the launch of this Greening Enterprises report with a very, I would say, sneaky subtitle, Transforming Processes and Workplaces. And these are two key words that I hope we can unpack today. It's both about processes, but it's also about workplaces. What do we do with workplaces? So my name is Jens Christensen. I work at the International Labour Office here in South Africa. I support enterprise development in countries in Eastern and Southern Africa. I've been the focal person for green enterprises and just transition and the green economy for some years. And sometimes the director, in a momentary lapse of reason, decides to make me an officer in charge of the office. So he's done that today. So on behalf of our director, Dr. Johnny Musabayana, I just want to extend a warm regards. He couldn't be here today because he is traveling to Botswana. So in terms of logistics, it's important that you're connected to the internet today on your phones, because unlike other events, we want you to use your phones today. So if you are not connected, please open your browser, go to Capital Connect, find that, or do it on your computer, that's also fine. And then the password is all small letters, connect me. And I think also to the participants online, well, obviously you're on your computer, most of you, so you don't need to connect, you're already connected, otherwise you wouldn't be online. So that's important. Then for those, we always need to talk a bit about logistics. So if you need to run out and have a break in the restroom, I'm not sure that's why it's called the restroom, but if you do, you go out, you turn to the right, and then the toilets are down there. So, Andre, can we put up the agenda? Because I just want to tell you what we have in store for you today. And what you see here, if you put up the agenda, Andre, we are going to spend about 2.5 hours, we hope, to talk about the Green Enterprise Report, the findings of the Green Enterprise Report. Here you see the program. I hope you can see it online as well. So I'm doing some opening remarks, and in just a moment, I'm going to find out if you think you are in the right place. Then we have some opening remarks, not from our director, Dr. Johnny Musabayana, but from Dr. Catherine Sachet, who is a team leader in the research department in Geneva. She's going to join us online and make some opening remarks. Then we have Sévane Ananian, who's sitting right there, who is one of our key researchers that is behind the global report. And then we hope to discuss the findings of the global report with you. Then we are going to have a coffee break. And then after that, we come back and we look at the presentation and findings of a study we did in South Africa that fed into the global report, I think with another 5 or 6 countries in total. So, and Valerie Dean, who's sitting there, and I keep telling her her name is not misspelled up there. Her name is actually not Green, it is Green. But I think, she works so much in the green enterprise space, you need to find a way to add that R, huh? So it becomes Valerie Green. We're going to discuss that, then we're going to do a bit of an exit poll, find out how you're doing and whether this was worth your while. All right, sounds good? So I want you to, Andre, put on the Slido poll, because now I just want to do a bit of an opinion poll and ask you a few questions, if that is fine. And are you connected? Alicia, you need help? You're good? You're good. Ria, you're connected? You're helping? Everyone is connected on their phones? Yeah, so I'm going to put up now. So Andre, if you can put up the Slido. Yeah. Okay, so what you can do two things. I think online or here you can either scan the QR code and then a little sort of, I think, website pops up. You click that and then you come to the slide. Or you can go to Slido, type into your browser, slido.com, and then you type in that registration code, which is hashtag 1951061. And Andre, can you just find out if participants online, see if anyone is good, if participants online are connected? Perhaps you can unmute Catherine, and we can hear from Catherine. If Catherine, you can see this. Fantastic. Yes. So someone says hi, Jens. Hi. Nice. So you can also ask questions. So we try to make it a bit participatory like this, right? But so are you all connected? So we have Government of Flanders, we have Gary. Fantastic. People online, they are connected. That's good. So are you all connected? So no. Yes. Alicia, you're doing some IT support. You're all connected here. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So we're waiting for Ria. She's an educator. Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna ask you the first question. Okay. And I want you to see. You can see it on your phone now, your computer. So why did you come here today? To learn about the greening of enterprises, networking opportunities. Had nothing better to do. My boss made me. To learn about just transition. So you just click your preferred choice and you hit submit. Yeah. Well. No, only one. Or you. I think there might actually be a multiple choice. Try to hit 2. So we have, you see up in the corner there, we have 10 people already answering. You can do more than one. Okay, so it's multiple choice. I think I allowed 2 options there. Yes. Okay. All right. Fantastic. So I think most of you are in the right place because it's not because only one person, I think, said my boss made me. Probably Nicholas, huh? Yeah. Because I think his boss is online. Okay. Okay. Fantastic. But I think it's great that no one said you didn't have anything better to do. Okay, so that's fine. So I think most of you here to learn about greening of enterprises and to learn about just transition. And I think this is also both you that are in the room, but also people online. Okay, let's go to the next question. So which type of organization best represents where you work? So we see the responses are ticking in. So 19 people have answered so far. Most are from government or government entity. Then we have donors, resource partners, international organizations. We have academia research, employer and business member organization. Who's from an employer business member organization in the room? That's probably Beth Jack. I think Beth Jack. I saw Beth online. Yes. Can you see online? Are you online? All right. Beth, I think we have an entrepreneur. We have a few entrepreneurs and other. Okay. Civil society organization, community. Can you scroll down, Andre, and see if there's anyone in that last one? No, that's because that's not. Okay, good. Okay, let's move on. Fine. So most are from government and donors, research partners. Okay. Next one. So how familiar are you with the topic of just transition? So I'm very familiar, I have some basic knowledge. I'm not really sure, to be honest. Have no idea. I'm lost in transition. Yeah. And obviously you know the movie, huh? Yes. Okay, good. Some basic knowledge, I'm very familiar. Probably my ILO officials, my ILO colleagues. Yes, Janita, Leanne from Department for Environment. Okay, that's good. So most of you have some basic knowledge, that's very good to know. Let's move on. So how much do you know about the greening of enterprises? I'm an expert, I have some solid background, I have some basic knowledge, I'm completely green. Not really sure, to be honest. 13 participants. Oh, that's fantastic. Sort of there's a majority that has some solid background. We have, I think, one person who is an expert. That's good. Two, I think now. Wonderful. So it looks like we have good number of people in the room that are familiar with the topic of green enterprises. So Sévane, you have a challenge when people start asking questions to the research findings. That's good. Okay, and finally, I just want to check the energy levels in the room today. So 5-star is you know, like when you're rating an Uber driver, 5-star, you're super happy, you're super energized. 1-star, then he won't accept a ride from you again, but or she. So just to check if people are, many people are actually not very energized. And here I should say that what is the beautiful thing of these hybrid events, I have two colleagues online, Gary, and who's sitting here in Pretoria, who's down with the flu, but he's still joining us. We have Alessandro, who's working closely with Sévane in the research department. He's actually down with COVID and is fighting a COVID. He said he has been a collector of variants. So I think this is the third or fourth time he's had COVID. So he's at home. He's helped upset us everything. So Alessandro, thank you for joining us online, and greetings to you in Geneva. Okay, so I think we can go back to the. I'll go back to this slide now. I just want to spend a few minutes to unpack the concept of just transition, because we're going to talk about just transition a bit today, because just transition and greening of enterprises are very closely related. But at the ILO, we get many questions around just transitions, and we know the whole conversation around just transition is gaining momentum in South Africa from just a few people speaking about just transition in smaller circles 4 or 5 years ago to really now. It's on everyone's lips, on the government, on donors and resource partners, and the Presidential Commission for Climate Change recently launched the Just Transition Framework in South Africa. So what is the relationship between the greening of enterprises in the context of just transition? And I think it's important we just try to unpack that because there's a lot of confusion about it. And these days, people tend to put just transition in front of everything, and the question is whether that is correct. So I think we need to just get the conversation narrative right. So just a little history. So the concept actually dates back to the 1990s, where North African trade unions started developing just transition programs to find new jobs and to protect workers that lost jobs because of environmental policies and climate action in the US. So that was the initial idea, a program for workers. So when workers fell out of employment because a factory was closed down, that was polluting or whatever, they had to be re-skilled and re-educated, or actually have new opportunities. Then one of the big global trade unions called Industry All, that represents 15 million workers globally in 140 countries. Around 2012, 2013, the whole concept of green jobs really was on everyone's lips. And Industry All brought into the ILO the concept of just transition. So in international labor conferences and governing body discussions, the concept of just transition really became sort of one of the strong narratives in the ILO and for ILO member states to start consider just transition in policies and programs and support to member states. So that's where in 2015, the Just Transition Guidelines towards environmentally sustainable economies and societies. And I think just dwell on that word, just transition towards environmentally sustainable economies and societies, was developed. And now they are just referred to as the just transition guidelines. They were developed by a group of ILO experts and other experts, representatives from trade unions, employers' organizations, governments, and so on and so forth, and is now a guideline that is used by all 187 member states of the ILO. And when we say member states of the ILO, we talk about governments, but we also talk about employers' organizations, the private sector, we talk about trade unions. So what are these just transition guidelines about? So the bottom line is that our current economic model of production and consumption is unsustainable. And I think those of you in this room will probably agree with that. So because of our economic models and the way we produce and consume, we emit greenhouse gases, there's climate change, global warming, dire consequences in terms of prolonged droughts and floods and changing weather patterns, which we also see in South Africa. I mean, anyone who has been to our lift in Cape Town, remember the day zero was approaching a few years ago where they were running out of water. So the point is that business as usual, the BAU, is no longer sustainable. Now, to avoid the most sort of worst consequences, the idea is that the world economy must be remodeled, right? Energy systems, industries, transport methods, supply chains, how we produce and consume must be redesigned. And in this way, we are actually facing a global shift today because we are moving into the end of the age of fossil fuels. When that end is happening, but clearly it's closer than it has ever been because we are depleting the world's fossil fuel resources. And the beginning of a new age is coming that is yet to be defined. And I think this is important that it's yet to be defined because defining that new age is a common global purpose, right? Not only government, but also not only government, but also employers and business member organizations, trade unions, you and us in this room, when we make economic choices as consumers and economic preferences, and we go and buy products that are produced under green, good processes, but also under good workplaces, good working conditions, right? And I think the conference of the parties, all the COP events, and the recent COP27 in Egypt is a testament to this. If you look at all the governments and interest groups and civil society and trade unions and private sector that are there to try to shape that new age, that a common global purpose, right? I think that's important. Now, where the just concept comes in is for working people and for enterprises. This is both an opportunity, but it's also a threat. Because as the world economy is redesigned, some jobs will be lost, some jobs will change, entirely new jobs will reemerge. And the question is still, where are all those new types of jobs going to come from? And the same thing can be said for enterprises. New economic business models as enterprises that are unsustainable go out of business and so on and so forth. So what are the new economic opportunities and models for enterprises, right? So both enterprises and workers is important. So as the world transitions, this is the whole idea, as the world transitions to more sustainable ways of producing and consuming, this transition has to be just, as in fair, not just as in only, but just as in fair. It's only transition, no, it's just transition as in fair transition, right? I think that's an important distinction. Where workers who lose their jobs have new opportunities and enterprises can pursue new and more sustainable business model. So a transition where no one is left behind. And this is where the ILO decent work agenda comes in. It's very important, the 4 pillars of decent work, which is social protection, social dialogue, protection of rights at work, and employment creation, and so on and so forth. So when we talk about the greening of enterprises and jobs, it is in the context of just transition and sustainable world economy where green enterprises is a new engine of growth and a strong driver of job creation. But, and I think this is where just transition and greening of enterprise is different, there's a big distinction because just transition is much broader than just greening of enterprises, and the ILO just transition guidelines highlight several policy areas that are very important to focus on. So it's macroeconomic and growth policies, is industrial and sexual environment policies, labor market policies, employment, skills development and lifelong learning, the occupational safety and health, social protection, active labor market policies, rights, social dialogue, and tripartism. So whereas greening of enterprise is a firm level and a sector level approach, just transition is a whole of society approach that needs to be well managed to create a world economy that contributes to the goals of addressing climate change, environmental sustainability, decent work for all, social inclusion, and the eradication of poverty, right? So therefore, the greening of enterprises is not just about transforming processes of how we produce, but also transforming workplaces, focusing on decent work. And that's why you have that sneaky subtitle. It's about processes, but it's also about these workplaces. So just to end, and now I'll end and hand over to Sévane. So the South Africa Just Transitions Framework is an excellent document, and if you haven't seen it yet, I encourage you to Google the Presidential Commission for Climate Change, find the Just Transition Framework, and I encourage you all to read it because it says that it doesn't really deal with climate change mitigation and adaptation policy per se, but what it does is rather focusing on managing the social and economic consequences of those policies while putting human development concerns at the center of decision making. And there you have it. I think that's a very beautiful way that they phrased it in the Climate Commission, and that's what Just Transition is about. So just some opening remarks so we have that distinction in place. And now let's pursue with our program. And can I hand over to you, Sévane, and give us some of the... Oh, no, sorry. Yes. Sorry. I'm sorry very much. Catherine, first we are listening to you, hearing from you to give us some opening remarks as well. So Andre, can you unmute Catherine and put her on speaker, and then we'll listen to you. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you for the survey. I thought this was a great idea to get to know each other, and good morning to all participants. Good morning to Valérie and Sévane. My name is Catherine Saget. I'm the Chief of the Work, Income and Equity Unit in the Research Department of the ILO. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome you for the launch of this report, Greening Enterprises, Transforming Processes and Workplaces in South Africa. Let me start by saying a few words on the context for the ILO research on climate change. The ILO looks, of course, at climate change through the lenses of decent work. How many jobs will be created from achieving the target of reducing carbon emission? What skills are needed in the growing green sector? What about social protection for people who are losing their job? What is the contribution of social dialogue? These are some of the questions the ILO has addressed and has provided evidence on. I think it is fair to say that the Paris Agreement in 2015 represented a milestone for the world of work on its way to environmental sustainability. Before 2015, there was not much understanding amongst the constituents and the office of climate change. First, understanding the consequences of climate change on labor market, and just understanding how much jobs and enterprises are dependent on a safe and healthy environment. But also, and perhaps as important, what is the contribution of labor markets, of social partners? What is their contribution to climate change policy and a successful just transition? Now, since 2015, this has changed, and the ILO has documented the impact of climate change on labor market. For example, 24 million jobs will be created from the transition based on increasing the share of renewable energy, retrofitting building, and increasing electric vehicles. Basically, 24 million jobs by 2030 from achieving the Paris Agreement targets. That is limiting warming to 1.5 degree. In South Africa, the ILO estimates also show that this scenario will create net employment. Not very much, but there will be net employment creation from an energy-based transition. There will also be employment losses, mostly in the fossil energy sector, in mining. And I think Valérie will talk about the potential and the constraints that enterprises face in South Africa in transitioning to an economy which produces less carbon emission. I would like to say something on the importance of skills development for green jobs. The new sectors, for example, renewable energy, they generate new types of jobs, and Jens has already said that. For example, energy auditors. What makes an energy? How do we know that someone is an energy auditor? It's a diploma. It's a diploma which certifies competencies and skills. And identifying skills gap in the green economy on the basis of data analysis and in consultation with businesses, that's the very first important step of skills development. As well as second step, putting in place new training program to respond to the skills gap in consultation with social partners. And also third step, monitoring the quality of this education. So this is one important part of a just transition. And on that, the ILO has published a report in 2020 on skills for a greener future, which shows evidence for South Africa, in this case, that anticipating skills development for the just transition has made progress in South Africa between 2005 and 2015. Now, there are impacts of the transition on other sectors than renewable energy, obviously, notably in sustainable transport. And we also have estimated what is the impact of, increasing the share of public transport, investment in public transport, and moving to a more electric vehicle. We have a report on that. And I think for the purpose of this the meeting this morning, the focus on sectors is important. First, because reduction in carbon emissions are often set at the sector level. It has started with energy. Now with COP27, there was a lot of talk on agriculture. Before that, transport, the circular economy, financial services, basically every sector of the economy is concerned, perhaps not at the same pace. Now, why this is important for the ILO, this sectoral approach? It's important because many labor institutions, for example, on wage fixing, on skills development, many labor institutions, social dialogue works at the sector level, and this is how they can also contribute to the just transition debate and to anticipate the consequences of the transition on labor market. I would like to say something on the impact of the just transition on gender equality. So our estimation shows that 22 million jobs can be created from the transition. However, many of these jobs are located in occupations which are dominated.
Hi, Catherine.
Yes?
Hi, sorry. We've just had a major power cut, so we are reconnecting only now. We lost the last 5 minutes.
Yeah, you were speaking, Catherine, and I think participants heard you online, but we couldn't hear you in the room here because the AV system was disconnected.
Okay.
Sorry.
No problem. Just tell me when.
But I think we have
Start again.
Okay, Catherine. Sorry, you can go ahead now. Very sorry. So this is, we were talking about energy transition. You were talking about the jobs coming from energy transition. I think this is, for those of you that are not familiar with South Africa, I think it was a very good example of, you know, the strain and pressure the coal-fired power plants under here in South Africa. So Eskom, the national energy provider, is actually having these load shedding where they have scheduled blackouts. And whenever there's a scheduled blackout, we just experience that. Then power goes, and but luckily Wi-Fi was still working. It was an inverter, but everything else went here. So we couldn't hear you, but the online participants could hear you. So please continue. If you want to go back a bit, up to you. I leave it to you to how you want to continue. But we didn't hear the last 4 minutes, I would say.
Okay. So did you hear on the sector approach? You know, Jens, you mentioned that it's very important to look at the transition in every sectors of the economy. And I think you're right, first of all, because the targets in reducing emission are often set at the sector level, but also it's important for us and the constituent because labor institutions they often work at the sector level. It's true of wage bargaining, social dialogue, skills development. Now, moving to the impact of the just transition on gender equality. So our estimation shows that jobs will be created from a transition based on energy, 24 million jobs. Jobs will be created from circular economy also. However, in the case of energy, our estimations also show that many jobs created by the transition are located in occupations which are dominated by men. For example, in construction or in manufacturing. This is why an important element of the just transition strategy is also to reduce job segregation so that men and women can both benefit from the new job. Now, I would like to move to the last 2 points of my presentation. I would like to say something on international labor standards. As in any economic restructuring, labor standards can serve as guideline to the restructuring. However, in this particular case, what is really important is to understand that international labor standards can actually protect the environment. They can do so in the case, indirectly, in the case of occupational safety and health standard. And here I just want to recall that South Africa has ratified Convention 155 on occupational safety and health. Standards can also directly protect the environment, as in the case of the Indigenous and Tribal People Convention, which provides for, it gives government the obligation of estimating the impact of any development program on Indigenous and Tribal people on the environment. So now moving on to really what is the core of the seminar. I was mentioning the global estimate on the impact of employment at the global level, including South Africa. We also have estimates of the transition, the impact of the transition at the sector level, transport, circular economy, agriculture a little bit. The ILO has also estimated the impact of the transition in specific region, in particular Latin America and the Caribbean, because we had data and finances. We also have some findings on policies. I mentioned skills. We have findings on social dialogue, and Sévane will elaborate on the role of social dialogue for just transition. And when you see the kind of work we had been doing up until 2 years ago, it is very clear that what was missing in the ILO work on climate change was the perspective of the enterprise and how sustainability is operationalized at the workplace with changes in work organization, waste management, and what can be the role of social dialogue locally and at the enterprise level. Hence, this report, Greening Enterprises Transforming Processes and Workplaces, which was launched last week at COP27. So here, what we're talking about essentially in this report about two things. First of all, we're talking about transforming production processes. to make them greener, and also producing more green outputs. But this report is also about workplaces. Now, just in a couple of sentences, workplaces are the place where workers need to be to carry out their work. So it can be our offices, for those who telework, can be a construction site. So there's a difference between workplace and enterprises. So when we speak about green workplaces, about their role in reducing emission, we mean, for example, using sustainable transport to commute, working in offices and factories which use resources efficiently, which have a waste management system, consuming sustainable food at work, and so on. So all of them can contribute to reducing emission at the enterprise level. Hence here, and I think it's very important in the context of South Africa, given the kind of institution and regional institution we have, is to outline the importance of cities and municipalities. As often, cities and municipalities are responsible or co-responsible for transport and waste management system. So in conclusion, what I would like to say is that evidence on the impact of the transition on labor market, as well as just transition principle, that is social dialogue and fairness, these two pillars are the foundation of a successful just transition. And this is why Jens and the team, with Jens and the team, we wanted to have this launch in South Africa. I wish you a good seminar and a constructive discussion.
Please give her a round of applause. Excellent. Thank you, Catherine, and thank you for joining us and putting those very important pointers out there. I think you made it even more clear what we're talking about now when we talk about just transition. So thank you for that. Now, with no further ado, thanks a lot, Catherine. I hope you're staying online and see whether Sévane is doing a good job. I would like to invite our researcher, Sévane, to come up here and present to us then this famous report we've now been talking about. I don't know whether you want to stand there or you want the roving mic. It's up to you.
Catherine said, I don't know if the mic is working. Yeah, I think it's fine. Thank you very much, Jens. Yeah, indeed, I'm very pleased to present this report today here with you. It's very fresh. It was published globally last week. And unfortunately, I just brought a few copies with me. But I think if there is a need for more copies, printed copies, I think we can organize this here with the office, and you can get some copies. Maybe before starting the presentation, with the help of Jens, we will run a short poll, as you had before, where we're just asking you two questions for which we will have answers during the presentation. And maybe we can discuss about them afterwards. I don't know, Jens, if you're ready. So yeah, sorry. So the first question is the greening of enterprise have an impact? Does it have an impact on production costs? Does it decrease production costs? Does it increase them? Or do you think there will be no impact at all on production costs? Okay. It's interesting. I think so far the majority of the participants thinks it will decrease the production cost. Yeah. True. Yeah. True. Let's pick on average. Can we switch to the other questions for you? So the other question is, in your view, will greening of enterprises impact employment level? So yes, overall some job will be lost is a possible answer. The second one is jobs will be created. And the third one is no impact on jobs at all. So it's good. I think it's positive. You think that overall jobs will be created, and with a minority of the participants thinking that job will be lost, and actually no participant thinks that there will be no impact at all. The pool is stabilized. Maybe we can have this one after the presentation to launch the discussion. Yeah. Yeah, we need to keep some questions for after the presentation. So waiting just for the PowerPoint to appear on the screen. Okay, there it is. Okay, so just I will start with the key message of the report. I think to put things clearly is that according to our results, most formal enterprises, including small ones, implement measures to reduce carbon emissions and waste. And generally, that is one of the questions that was asked. It leads to no cost, or even it reduces the production cost for a majority of enterprise. I'm speaking here about the average for the countries we surveyed, but of course there can be variations across countries. We can discuss it later, and we can see more specifically the case of South Africa, especially with the presentation of Valérie. Another finding is that the measures to green workplaces are an increasing part of measures to green enterprises, and something that appears to matter for workers. And one of the last important messages is that policies actually and regulations are needed to support enterprises' engagement in the green transition. And this can, for instance, cover policies aiming at providing certification to green products. This can cover policies aiming at strengthening skills and training programs. And all these policies can have an impact, especially on small enterprises in developing countries. So just first, I will remind that enterprises actually are key actors of the just transition, but they also need a stable, predictable, and natural, healthy environment to function and to operate. And this environment is becoming increasingly unhealthy. For several reasons, I will just go through 4 of them with you. For instance, there is a scarcity of natural resource that is increasing. Here I exemplify the trend in fresh water. Globally, there is a decrease there is an increase in the withdrawal of the fresh water, and the Aquastat figures show that the increase has been of around 8% since 2002. And of course, this has an impact for enterprises, especially for sectors that need all these resources, such as the food systems, the mining sector, the manufacturing sectors. There is also conspicuously a loss of biodiversities. Especially we can see it with the World Wildlife Fund Index on the population of mammals, birds and amphibians, reptiles and fish that has declined globally by 68% between 1970s and 2016. All this also has an impact on enterprises. It's an irreversible cost for enterprises. And also it induces, because the loss of biodiversity, there is no recovery for it. And also it induces it has an impact on workers' health. There are some studies that show that the loss of the biodiversity have an impact on human health. Maybe another example is that the higher intensity, there is, due to climate change, higher intensity and frequency of extreme weather events, such as droughts, flood, increase of sea level, or heat waves. And all of these events, of course, impact enterprises. It creates disruptions in productions and in supply chains, which have also a cost for enterprises. And one last result that is also linked to climate change is that there is an increased risk of heat stress that has an impact, of course, on labor and labor productivity. And our impact assessment that we made in 2019 with the ILO heat stress report shows that worldwide there will be around 2% of productivity loss by 2030 due to heat stress. And we measure it in terms of numbers of working hours lost. Of course, in South Africa, these were the global figures, but South Africa, we also see these trends, and there is a tension, of course, in terms of withdrawal of fresh water, for instance. The population of mammals, birds, amphibian, reptiles, and fish declines around the same average than what is observed globally. Some extreme events will happen more and more. There are some studies that show that there is an extreme increase in extreme rainfalls, especially during summer. And our heat stress reports, for instance, also point to impact on jobs and the numbers of work hours. And we estimate that around 13,000 full-time jobs could be lost by 2030 due to heat stress. So, of course, enterprises are key actors of the just transitions, but many factors can actually influence enterprises to go green. Some of these factors are external to the enterprises, and some others are internal to enterprises. For instance, as example of external factors, there is a broad regulatory frameworks implemented by governments, which include regulation policies. Of course, these are this is imposed to enterprises. There are some factors that are more internal, such as the business case for enterprises to produce green products or services, for instance, and the business rationale of enterprises. Green finance is also something that can also influence enterprises in their decisions to go green. The culture and norms of enterprises, and some of these norms can be very personal, especially for small and medium enterprises. For instance, the personal norms of the owner of a company might have an impact on the motivation of the enterprises to go green. And some factors are both external and internal to enterprises. For instance, environmental innovations and skills. Of course, are external factors that depend on their availability externally to the enterprises, but it can also be part of the strategy of enterprises to increase the environmental innovation or to train their workers. And finally, one important factor is, of course, social dialogue. So our desk review shows that social dialogue is an important factor. The social partners were key in drafting just transition plans in the period that led up to the 2015 Paris climate agreements and beyond. However, we observe that there is a gap in terms of the level at which policies are decided nationally, and the involvement of social partners in these decisions, and the implementation of these at the enterprise or local level, where sometimes social partners are less involved. Maybe to unpack a bit and to detail a bit the topic of social dialogue and the governance of social dialogue in the just transition, I wanted to show you these tables that derive from the desk review that we conducted in around 16 countries. And in terms of governance of the just transition, there are a bucket of country in which social dialogue is actually social dialogue plus. It involves multi-stakeholders, for instance, social partners, employers and business and trade unions, but also it can also involve consumer association as well as local communities. So these countries are in the third column of the table. In some cases, social dialogue is not based at all. Well, the governance of the transition doesn't involve specifically social dialogue, so it involved multi-stakeholder framework. This is the case of the country in the second column. And in the third case, the first column of the table, the initiatives on the just transition as just government-led, and they don't involve social partners, but sometimes they involve experts group on environmental issues. And just to remind you, yes, the case of South Africa. South Africa is actually one of the countries we reviewed where there is a strong involvement of the social partners through, in particular through the NEDLAC, the National Economic Development and Labour Council, as you know. And this may come from the heavy reliance, the initial heavy reliance of the country on coal and its dependency, and the need to find solutions for it. And one of the example of good social dialogue practice can be, for instance, the tripartite National Green Economy Accord of 2011, which encompassed like commitment with specific commitments for each of the parties of the agreement. So what does it mean for enterprises to go green? I will detail this a bit here. It has been a bit unpacked already by Jens, but greening enterprises can mean greening the outputs of the enterprise, for instance, producing green services or green products. So this is the right hand side of the chart here. And an enterprise can also, so in terms of green outputs, for instance, you have green to produce solar panels or to propose green finance services. And in terms of greening process, this is the other way to go green for an enterprises. It can mean, for instance, implementing resource efficiency action in the production process so that the enterprise can, for instance, save energy. But I will unpack a bit more the green processes, because there is one aspect to green the processes that is not often detailed, which is, and it's useful if we want to assess the full capacity of enterprises to go green, is the greening of the workplaces, which encompass elements that you have in the third column here. For instance, elements such as work organization, sustainable transport, sustainable consumption, such as energy use, waste management, food at work, and also environmental rights at work. But I will detail all these elements in the coming slide. Of course, an enterprise can also go green by applying greening methods, procedure and practice into the production process. And this is the first column here, such as energy efficiency, resource intensity, waste management, green marketing, and labels. So I will unpack a bit the role of the regulatory tool for greening workplace in the coming slide. Because we've seen throughout the report that laws and policies are an important way to promote structural change at the workplaces. And actually, regulatory tools relating to greening workplaces can promote sustainability in general, and more specifically, sustainable consumption in the enterprise. And we have conducted for that a review across countries involving all regions of the world were encompassed by this review, and we have found that over 65 countries and territories implemented initiatives to promote sustainability through workplaces, and this includes 5 countries in Africa, which are Ethiopia, Namibia, South Africa, and Uganda and Zambia. These were the countries that were covered by our desk review. And if we look a bit more in detail at the evolution of the, in terms of implementation of the regulation, we see that regulation at the workplace through environmental-related legislation has been growing exponentially in the past few decades, and especially since 2004. Since 2004, 2/3 of the legislation also were implemented by countries. So there is an increasing trend in implementing this legislation. This legislation is generally flexible in nature. It promotes sustainable consumption in the enterprises. And for small and medium enterprises, generally, it's of promotional nature, and it encourages enterprises to take steps towards the greening of their workplaces. So we will unpack now a bit this legislation. And actually, we see that the legal and policy frameworks as ways for enterprise to go green cover the wide range of measures governing different aspects of the workplaces. So I will mention some of them here. An important component is sustainable consumption, which can consist in reducing waste management, and of course, awareness raising for all the stakeholders on sustainable consumption. There are another component which is linked to energy-related measures through energy audit within the enterprise, awareness raising, also on energy-related measures, and energy conservation or energy efficiency, which are the ways to save energy for an enterprise. The organization of work is, of course, an important component. This can encompass teleworking. There have been a lot of debate around teleworking in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, of course. But there are also other tools to link to the organization of work, such as those linked to working time. And for instance, you may want to, countries may have tried to reduce to shorten, the work week, or to reduce the number of working hours, such as to avoid the commuting of workers, for instance. There are another bucket of measures that are linked to a sustainable transport. This include corporate mobility plan, fiscal and other economic incentives for taking public transportation, for instance, urban planning as well. And for instance, some measures consist in trying to build housing near the workplaces of workers so as to reduce the commuting of workers. And some other examples can just be to promote the building of walkways or cyclable paths. This was the case, for instance, in Singapore. There was a recent smart mobility strategy 2030 that was implemented by Singapore in 2018, which aimed at increasing the number of cyclable paths, but also walkways, sheltered walkways. And another important component are those that are related to the workers' environmental related rights. So for instance, the right of the workers to request information, the right of notification, the right to refuse to work if there is something harmful to the environment. And an important one is the protection of environmental whistleblower, of course. And in this regard, actually, South Africa has taken many noticeable actions. In particular, in the 1998 National Environment Management Act, if I remember, where there is an important component on the protection of environmental whistleblowers. Aside from these aspects, there are some broader regulatory tools that have an impact on various dimensions of the greening of enterprise and the greening of the workplace more specifically. These ones are in particular the sustainable business model. There has been a growing discourse on sustainable business model that has started in countries such as the US. France also had, through the Société à Mission, for instance, had also implemented this kind of business model. Recently also, in 2018, Colombia has created the big enterprises, Beneficio e Interés Colectivo, and these countries seeks to grant legal recognition to enterprise seeking voluntarily to redefine the meaning of enterprise success. And in this framework, the legal framework for business is that they voluntarily choose to combine economic and social and environmental objective. And this is why, for instance, there is a naming BIC in Colombia. It's Beneficio e Interés Colectivo. And another important tool is, of course, the green public procurement. So if this public procurement concerns the public sector, that there are laws and policies that are linked to public procurement have the potential to lead to sustainable practices in workplace, because it induces some enterprise in the private sector also to implement some change. And often this public procurement law commit to promote circular and sustainable development in small and medium enterprises. That's what we observed in the review that we conducted. So what is important is to highlight that there is no one-size-fits-all. Actually, the countries reviewed have focused on one or several practices area, even if they didn't provide regulation on all the dimensions that I unpacked here. And for instance, South Africa and the Republic of Korea have made the just transition a central concept in their sustainable commitment. In South Africa, there is a strong emphasis, I highlighted it, on workers' rights at the workplace. In China, resource efficiency has been one of the primary drivers to integrate sustainability into the workplace, and there was less emphasis on labor legislation, aside from some pieces of legislation that applied more to occupational safety and health linked to the environment. In the United Arab Emirates, for instance, there was a focus on education and awareness raising for greening enterprises and workplace, with some initiative at the sectoral level. And in Colombia, the focus has been in the creation recently of this sustainable business model, which offer enterprise a legal framework to operate with both economic, social, and environmental goals. So, concretely, how many enterprises are engaged in the green transitions? So, as I highlighted in the key message of the report, we saw that in our data, 2/3 of the enterprises from lower and upper middle income countries that were surveyed in the context of the World Bank Enterprise Survey reported having implemented recent measures to green their production process. And this result is actually in line with other survey data collected on enterprises taking action toward greening the environment, toward their greening. For instance, in 2021, 9 out of 10 enterprises surveyed in the Eurobarometer data reporting taking actions toward the green transition. So this Eurobarometer, as explained in its name, more focus on European countries. But of course, there are variations across countries. And for instance, in the World Bank, among the enterprises that were surveyed by the World Bank Enterprise Survey, there is an important heterogeneity. The share of enterprises greening their production process is 48 in Montenegro, for instance, whereas in Malta, it's 98%. What we remark overall is that there is the share of enterprises greening their production process reflects the general environmental performance of the country. And countries with a higher environmental performance index are associated with a higher share of enterprise going green. Though enterprises may implement some change in their production process or even offer green products or services, there is some that do not engage in the transition to the same extent. And for instance, according to the World Bank Enterprise Survey, among enterprises that have recently implementing greening process, 43% implement just one or two of this process, while 57 implemented 3 or more. So this is shown in the chart here. And for upper middle income countries, the share is 45% of enterprises implement 1 or 2 greening processes, while 55% implement more of this process. And also, looking at the data from the Flash Eurobarometer, we see that enterprise can actually combine the fact that they implement greening process to the fact that they offer to their clients green products or services. And we see that actually 1/3 of enterprises implementing greening processes also offer green products and services, and very few enterprises in the survey data report offering green products or services without implementing greening processes. Just 2% of the enterprises. Maybe a few words concerning the characteristics of the firms that go green. We have seen while we were working on the data that firm characteristics affect their probability to implement green measures and the extent to which they do so. And for instance, bigger firms, those with high annual revenues of more than 10 million euros, as well as those selling to public administrations, are more likely to adopt green processes. So sorry for the euros. This is this findings are based on the Flash Eurobarometer data, but what we see in the descriptive statistic, it's consistent with what we see with the World Bank Enterprise Survey, which cover a broader number of countries in terms of income level of countries, for instance. Also, in terms of result, big companies, those with increasing revenues and those who sell to public administrations seem more likely to offer green products and services. And finally, bigger firm, richer firm, as well as those selling to public administration tend to implement a large number of resource efficiency measures. So all in all, we see that there is room for maneuver for targeted support to enterprises that are the least engaged in the green transitions, for instance, that are the enterprises that tend to be smaller, those with smaller annual revenues, or those who do not necessarily sell to public administration. So what can be the impact of implementing green measures for an enterprise? there are two important dimensions to consider. One, what can be the impact on production costs? So this will answer maybe partly the question that was asked at the beginning of the presentation through the poll. We see in the data that 2/3 of enterprises reported that there is 2/3 of enterprises implementing resource efficiency action reported that it had no impact or even it decreased their production costs. There are some variations across countries. It can depend, and also across firms. And for instance, this statistics applies more to bigger enterprises, where the share of enterprise reporting a decrease in their production cost after the implementation of the greening process is higher, actually. So this corresponds to the figure here. On average, we have 32% that of enterprises that says that it has decreased slightly the production cost. 5% that say that it has decreased significantly the production cost. So 37% in total. And if you look at bigger enterprise, those of 250 employees or more, the share of enterprises declaring that they decrease their production cost is 50% actually. So it's a bit more. Another dimension to look at is, of course, the impact of implementing greening measures on employment. And we see in the data from the World Bank Enterprise Survey that there is no significant impact on employment, except in lower middle income country where greening process seem to induce a decrease in employment at the firm level. I insist at the firm level because it may differ from some of the results that Catherine, for instance, highlighted earlier, which are at the macro level. And the net impact that can have the just transition and the green transition at the macro level may be different than when we find here just for lower middle income country at the firm level. And globally, yes, the net impact of the green transition is estimated by the ILO around 18 million more jobs created by enterprises, in particular offering green products and services. So this can differ a bit from what we detail here. Another result is that enterprises that adopt more greening process were more likely to provide training, and this can be explained, for instance, by the fact that enterprises want to keep up the skills of their workers when implementing greening process and want to upskill their workers in line with the greening process implemented. What is the role of MSMEs in the just transition? So I just wanted to highlight here in this slide that, of course, MSMEs are essential to the just transition for at least two reasons. They have a collective environmental impact that is actually so substantial. So, for instance, statistics show that MSMEs account for 64% of total industrial pollution in Europe. And in China, it's 53% of total industrial carbon emission. So their impact on the environment is huge. And also MSMEs have an important role to play with regard to employment. And among the four countries that we have more particularly analyzed in the report, which are South Africa, Republic of Korea, Colombia, and Kyrgyzstan, we see that actually the share of employment which is in micro and small enterprises is between 60% and 91% of total employment. So this figure highlights that MSMEs are key actors of the just transition. So before concluding, and it was important to highlight what could be the factors that influence SMEs to introduce green practices. There are drivers, but there are also some challenge. Among the main drivers that we've seen in the enterprise survey that we've implemented in the sample countries, in which South Africa was part of, but the case of South Africa will be more detailed by Valerie later. So the main driver can be the concerns of small enterprise in terms of climate change, and the concern that the impact of climate change may have on their business. Some other enterprises highlighted the reduction of production costs that can be associated with taking up green practices. Some other enterprises mentioned the change in demand from consumer and suppliers and the need to keep up with the new demand emerging from the changes linked to climate change, and also the incentive, of course, provided by the government, for instance, in terms of tax reduction when implementing green measures, was another of the drivers highlighted by small and medium enterprises. In terms of barriers and challenge, one of the huge challenge, I think, Valerie will come back on this point later, but was generally the lack of knowledge about what is a just transition. That appears quite clearly in the interviews conducted. The lack also of financial and human resources within enterprise to implement this change. The lack of awareness regarding the policies or technologies that are available to enterprises. And some enterprises also highlighted the complexity of administrative and legal procedures to take up green practices. So this shows that policies can actually play an important supportive role in greening the small and medium enterprises and greening also their workplaces. In terms of policies, before concluding, I just wanted to highlight that the fact that the COVID-19 recovery has been an opportunity for many countries, of course, to foster the green transition. And we can see that in the OECD Green Recovery Database, which for the country we more specifically analyzed. Here it's just 3 countries, South Africa, Colombia, and Republic of Korea, that were available in the OECD database. It classifies each measures implemented in the aftermath of the COVID-19 according to their status with regard to the environment, and it more specifically highlights the number of measures that will have a positive impact, that are expected to have a positive impact on the environment. For instance, in South Africa, in all the 3 countries, there are some measures that will are expected to have a positive impact on the environment. In South Africa, these measures target a wide range of sectors, such as energy, transport, buildings, industry, waste management, and forestry. One important measure was also the creation of the Presidential Climate Change Commission. Of course, you are aware of it, with specific engagements towards the just transitions. In Korea, there are 7 measures that are expected to have a more positive impact on the environment. Most of these measures target air pollution through economy-wide initiatives, or by focusing on the energy sector and other industrial sectors, such as mining and manufacturing. Economy-wide, most of the measures were implemented in the framework of the Korean New Deal. And lastly, for Colombia, maybe one important measure to highlight in comparison of those other countries is the measure that target the agricultural sector with the goal of planting 180 million trees through incentive for silvopasture and agroforestry with community support. As a conclusion, more needs to be done, of course, to green enterprises. This encompasses the macro level, the sectoral level, and the micro level. And at the macro level, enabling business environment and giving clear information on the strategy towards environmental sustainability is key. This includes also monitoring the green transition and implementing adjustments when it's necessary. And business representation in the debate of the green transition is an important step, but more could be done to make the transition more inclusive, especially when it comes to social partners, and especially at the local and enterprise level. At the sectoral level, a shared approach is needed to ensure a just transition and to ensure that the green transition have anticipated impact on employment, wage, skills, and that the just transition will happen smoothly in sectors that will create employment, but also sectors that will maybe displace workers. And this includes improving green market sectors and value chain, as well as skill development policies with participation of employers and workers representatives. And at the micro level, green entrepreneurship policy involving the training of managers, technical intervention, and intervention at the enterprise level to facilitate, for instance, certification formality and the adoption of green processes is key, and this can be adjusted depending on the peculiarities of the enterprises and the sector. So this is just a reminder of the key message, so I won't go through this. And I wanted to thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sévane. That was a very comprehensive and detailed presentation. So let's take some round of questions, but let's give the benefit, first of all, to participants online before we come back to you in the room. And I know that I see a question was coming from Gary. So Gary, can I just ask you to unmute and ask your question?
Sure, Jens, can you hear me? Is that a yes? You can? You can? I'm lip reading.
Yes.
Yep, great,
Yes.
super. Yeah, good morning, everybody. Sorry I can't be with you there today. I work on the employer side with Jens, and unfortunately I come down with a bit of a flu, or I'm hoping it's not something worse last night, so I'm unfortunately there with you. My question is on the communication side, because there can be a kind of a perception that changes in terms of moving towards sustainability can be quite costly, can be quite disruptive, particularly for kind of small enterprises, micro enterprises that have, you know, an awful lot on their plate, and smaller micro and medium and micro enterprises in this country do have an awful lot on their plate. They are faced with a lot of challenges on a daily basis. So what can be done in terms of promoting to those actors, the smaller guys, that sustainability efforts, you know, can affect positively the bottom line? They can be very good for your branding. They can be very good for accessing supply chains. They can be very good on the economic side, as opposed to just, you know, the moral and the ecological side. Over, Jens.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Gary. As always, a difficult question from you. Let's take a few more questions. I see there are no more questions online, so perhaps you can think about this, Sévane, or if Catherine, you online, you also want to help participating. Any other questions in the room? Yes, Janita, and you must speak in the microphone so participants online can hear you.
Okay, thanks, Jens. Thank you for that presentation, Sévane. I'm Janita Battle from the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment. And I just have 3 questions for you. The first one, is that better? Okay. So the first question is with regard to the list of criteria which you provided, you know, green finance, business rationale, technology, skills. or technical skills, culture, norms, social dialogue, etc. I noticed that awareness raising to actually get businesses to transition to green enterprises was not one of the main criteria. So I was just wondering why. The second one is with regard to the green product uptake. Given that South Africa was one of the case studies, is it a niche market or is it something that's growing in the country itself? Because then it definitely makes a case for why transition to green. And my final question is related to finance. Is finance a limiting factor? And I think it relates to the previous question which was made earlier on. Is finance a limiting factor to transitioning businesses to green enterprises, because they've got to revisit their business operations, they've got to take into consideration what it's going to cost with regard to technology uptake and innovation. And then the downside of it is obviously you're downscaling your business in terms of employment. Thanks.
Wow, Sévane, you have some questions to answer here. Very nice. Let's take one more question. Kina production, who are here? No? Ria, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Ria from the Department of Basic Education's E-Cubed unit. We work on employability, entrepreneurship, and education for lifelong learning in schools. And we've started introducing project-based learning as compulsory in our schools. And what I want to know is, has any research been done on schools? I mean, how important are schools as a pipeline to improving greening of workplaces? And also starting greening entrepreneurial ventures. Is there any research? What advice do you have for?
There is now, perhaps. Okay, let's stop here. And Sévane, do you want to have a first go? And I think Catherine, and I think you're also online, and Valerie, I invite you to answer these questions.
I think everybody can jump in at some point. It's an open discussion, and I may not have all the answers to this complicated question. For more specifically for the South African case, I think we can also get back to some of this question after Valerie's presentation, because maybe it will highlight some more specific aspects. Once again, the results we presented in the report, they are, especially for the quantitative results, they are averages. We tend to show that there are variation. We try to highlight that there are variation across countries, but sometimes the average can mask what is happening in a specific country. So I just wanted to make that clear. Maybe one of the challenge that it was highlighted in one of the last slides of the presentation, and maybe this is the case also in South Africa, but is explaining actually to stakeholders what is the just transition, because it actually there seems to be a lack in understanding what is behind the just transition, and what are it encompasses, of course, greening the enterprises, but all the labor aspects behind are not necessarily always highlighted. So this is part, of course, of the skills that are needed and the training that is needed around the issues. Maybe just linked with awareness raising. So when I try to unpack a bit the dimensions in terms of regulations, it's regulations that we observed within each country. So it's for each aspect. Yes, there are two for which we mentioned awareness raising, because that's what we saw in the desk review of the regulation, but and it appeared to be more linked with I think it was sustainable consumption and the efficiency of resource. This appears to be the case, but for other, it's not because no regulation has been taken by countries on awareness raising for all the dimensions that it's not necessary. It's really a desk review of what exists in terms of regulation. I don't know. So in terms of Yes, so green finance, of course, I'm sure there is some room for maneuver also for awareness raising on the topic. So in terms of training, I think Catherine just detailed a bit the necessary training around the topic of the green transition and the just transition. It was there were some specific work carried out by the ILO. It was, for instance, in Latin America, there is a report on skills on the green skills. So this can give some ideas of more specifically, concretely applying training programs that can be implemented. Yeah, this is. I think we can send you the link to the report if necessary. I'm not sure. I don't know if probably I missed some answers.
But I see we have a few more questions online, but I see that Catherine would like to answer the question on education and the role of schools, perhaps. So, and I think Catherine, if you answer this, then I think we take one more round, and then we break for a short coffee break. Huh? So, Catherine, over to you. You can unmute.
Yes, thank you, Jens. You know, since the Tokyo Protocol, much work has been done by governments around the world to raise awareness and of students and on the general public of on environmental issues. And of course, this is education is the responsibility of UNESCO in the UN division of responsibilities. When we speak about skills and training, it's really vocational skills and training, which is the ILO responsibility. So in 2021, the UNESCO released a published a report on environmental education. It is quoted in our report, page 19. You know, I hear that there's some copies in the room, and this question comes from the room. So please have a look at page 19. So this report evaluates the level of integration of environmental components into national development plans and education between 1950 and 2011 in 50 countries, and it shows a very positive trend. So there are more and more integration of environmental awareness in general education in the 50 countries reviewed. Thank you.
Catherine, thank you very much for that answer. So we have actually a participant joining us from Zimbabwe. So I just want to ask a gentleman from the ILO there called Tafatswa Chirinda to unmute and ask the question. I'm going to ask you to unmute Tafatswa. Let me just do this.
Thank you, Jens, and good morning, colleagues. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we hear you loud and clear, Tafatswa.
Yes, great, and an excellent presentation. My question was in particular where there was a presentation on 5 countries. I think it was Ethiopia, Zambia, South Africa, where they have concrete policies with respect to supporting the enterprises. So I just wanted to hear from colleagues pertaining to who undertook this research, what could have been the incentives for these countries to undertake such policy processes, and what are the barriers then that are affecting for other countries rather to have such policies affecting? What could be then the barriers which need to be overcome by other countries so that at least we can have a high rate of policies that support the greening of enterprises being established across Africa? Thank you. And then finally, could this be associated with the availability of climate financing? Over to you, Jens.
Okay, thank you very much, Tafatswa. And then we have another question online. I'm just going to read it out. This is from Natasha Turton, who I think has been working with the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor. If you're familiar with Natasha, I think she's based in Cape Town, and she's asking this question. I didn't hear the explanation on this slide showing a decrease in employment in lower middle income countries. Are the reasons known for why there would be a decrease in employment from greening in low middle income countries? So that's a very good question. That was one of the findings. Why only in lower middle income countries? And then I think there was one more question here. And then and after these questions and answers, I think we need to take a break for coffee.
Thank you very much. My name is Maria. I'm with the ILO, also working with employers together with Jens and Gary. And of course, thanks a lot, Sévane. Nice to see you again for a very great presentation. Mine is just on the issue around, you spoke about public procurement being either one of the ways or avenues for promoting just transition. And just wanted to know the rationale for talking just about public procurement, because in most countries where mining in particular and other bigger private enterprises are engaged in procurement, it can actually create a very good avenue to get the private sector involved in also incentivizing the greening of the economy. Whether there was any specific rationale for focusing primarily on public procurement. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks. One more. Okay, one last question.
Thank you very much. Alicia here from the ILO Pretoria office. I work on skills development. Thank you very much for your presentation and the report. Maybe one question and a comment on skills, just to say and maybe share that there is a sister publication, which is nice perhaps to see if they can talk to each other. It's a tool that we have just launched on greening TVET. And it goes really through the entire process of designing competency standards, understanding the skills needs, and see how training programs can respond to that. It's been launched just a month ago as well. I think what is interesting, and I don't know if it was part of this research, is not only to see what are the skills, but are enterprises and TVET interested in working together? Because that's the bottleneck, no? And who enterprises use to provide their training, and to what extent these solutions can be provided by a TVET system that is more inclined towards the greening of economies. And so that's an internal reflection that we have, and it would be nice to hear from you if anything emerged from the research on the willingness of enterprises, and if you see differences among the sizes of enterprises on whether they prefer to train their own people, train their own workers, or rely on TVET institutions to provide the skills. So just to add that to the discussion, thanks.
Great question. I think it's a big debate in South Africa where many enterprises feel that the TVET graduates that are coming out of the system does not meet their needs. So thank you for that question, Alicia. Sévane, Catherine?
Yeah, so maybe I will just highlight a bit the result on the decrease in employment in lower middle income country. So this is just what we find is just for this category of income, not for the upper middle income country and high income country. But this finding is actually in line with other finding, which shows that innovations, technical innovation, might have a detrimental impact on employment in lower middle income country. For instance, for many reasons. So probably research should still be needed to highlight a bit more, to explain a bit more this result, but it can be linked to the introduction of productivity gains through technology in countries where the labor productivity is actually low. This can be due for instance, by the fact that the labor, when the change is implemented, actually the workforce has not the right skills to be able to implement the change, and at least in the short run, there can be some adjustment in terms of unemployment. The report, the finding of the report is on the rather short run. We analyze the change in employment within the 3 years consecutive to the change. So it's not on the very long, it's not the long run impact of the introduction of environmental change. So this is one of the reasons. In terms of public procurement, yes, you're right. I don't know if I get totally your question, but actually the thing is that public procurement can target huge number of private sector enterprise. So this way it has some leverage to actually, for instance, through introducing some specific clause in public contracts, it can impact private enterprise, on a very large scale. And I don't know if it's already the case. Maybe you can highlight this point. In South Africa, is there some public procurement measures that are implemented towards the green transition or not? And in terms of skills, yeah, for the it's a huge debate, TVET program, and the willingness of enterprise to be associated to this program. I don't know, maybe Catherine on this point of skills can complement what I will say, but generally some countries have managed to make the TVET programs both mutually beneficial for enterprises and workers, and this can be one of the way maybe to introduce this TVET and greening enterprises in countries that are need to reform their TVET programs. But I don't know, Catherine, maybe if you have any complementary thoughts about this.
Thank you, Sévane, and thank you very much for the question. Just very quickly, what we did in our survey is we looked at different TVET systems from the point of view of how they work institutionally and how they anticipate or not the consequences of climate change on skills development. So we are, and what is the participation of social partners, because we think this is good for the outcome. So what we found is that in many countries, no, not many countries, let's say 1/3 of countries, there's really no anticipation at all. Now, some countries, what they do is that they have a specific bodies, like it's the case of South Africa, if I remember correctly. There's a specific body looking at the implication of climate change on skills. And some other countries, they do it like in a transversal way. Every skills or training institution is supposed to integrate the impact of climate change. And of course, what we want to see at the end, what is the impact? What is the impact on environmental performance? So we have done that in the report that I mentioned, Skills for a Greener Future, which looks at South Africa. What we have not done is we have not done any surveys of countries. We have not gone down to the micro level at this point. So, but thank you for suggesting that. It's very important also what you said, the point you raised for, the quality of the TVET that is generated, and whether it also corresponds to the needs of enterprises, and whether it's linked or not to higher wages. Thank you, Ova.
All right, thank you very much, Catherine. Were you finished? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. There was a bit of noise in the we didn't quite hear. But thank you very much. So perhaps that's area of future research, looking at enterprise levels, the companies with dynamic suppliers, skills, jobs, and everything like that. So let's take a short look. Let's just take 10 minutes, because I've actually lied before. I thought a little bit of a mystery facing in terms of that there will be a coffee break with some snacks now. There's only coffee and tea outside, but there are actually no snacks. So you have some snacks and finger on the way out in the break. But for now, why don't we just take 10 minutes, stretch our legs, and go and pick up a coffee perhaps or a tea, you can be back in here and then you can continue with the next session. But for now, please give Sévane a round of applause and Catherine, and thank you for your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, 10 minutes, online participants, please come back at 11:30 if you don't mind, if you'd like me to stay with us. And you can go and make your own coffee somewhere, wherever you are. Thank you. Microphone on? Okay. All right, everyone, thank you for being on time and very topic. I just want to take your importance. Can you stay a bit longer? If you need to go at 12 o'clock, please leave if you have other appointments. But I think, I foresee us running out of time because now we're going to have presentation, whatever, and then some questions and discussion. So if you can send to 12:15, but if you cannot, please.
Thank you very much, Jens, and good afternoon to our audience here in the room as well as those online. And thank you very much to Catherine and to Sévane and to the whole team that put this report together. I think it's very timely that a report like this is produced because for a long time when we talk about carbon emissions and climate change, we think about we have thought about big enterprises. So the need to talk about smaller businesses and medium-sized businesses, I think, is very important. But I think the fact that you've also added the word transforming workplaces is also really important because quite often we are focused on products. And I like the fact that Catherine reminded us that even in South Africa, occupational health and safety is important. And I don't know these days where it is, but I remember when sustainability was first introduced in South Africa, it sat under occupational health and safety, or it was connected to that. And I think we forget or we've forgotten the connection to be made when we're talking about transformation in terms of environment. How does it also translate into decent work, into healthy working conditions? Because there's a lot that we do in our workplace, especially if it's carbon intensive and so on, that can actually have negative impacts or positive, depending on how we're looking at it. So I'm really pleased that we have added that. So I'm going to kick straight into my presentation, and I'm going to say that South Africa was one of 4 countries where there was a bit of a deeper dive taken to look at the topic in terms of what is classified as middle income countries, although I think that South Africa and Colombia are probably more on a par than the other two. I'm not too sure about the other two, but it's Kyrgyzstan and the Republic of Korea were the other two. So those are the 4 countries that were used as a sample. And a mantra almost of this whole report has been more needs to be done. And I think throughout my presentation, please consider from whatever I'm producing or presenting here, what is the more that needs to be done? Because I sum it up at the end, but along the way, you may see for yourselves, where are the gaps? So our process was just briefly to approach Business Unity South Africa, which is the umbrella or apex organization, to give us some leads into how we could contact the sample that the ILO wanted to look at, which in our case included agro-processing, as well as the construction sector and the retail sector. Now you will see when I get to the examples of the companies we've looked at, that you have sectors and then you have subsectors. So you talk about retail, those that feed into the retail sector are just so many different sectors. Because remember, a retailer sells shoes and they sell wine and they sell cereal. So there are just so many sectors to be considered when you're talking about the value chain and supply chain of who they give information to and who they support. There were standardized questions asked across the 4 countries. And one of the questions we were trying to address included what support do these companies need or enterprises, and what were the challenges they faced in transforming their businesses in terms of environmental sustainability, as well as a just transition. Sorry. So this is by no means the whole basket of challenges and opportunities, but I've just highlighted those that I think are that came out of the report, but are also, most of us do know most of them, and they are pertinent in terms of being the drivers, as well as the opportunities that we see in South Africa at the moment. So first of all, of course, we all know that South Africa is a carbon emitter, especially because of its dependence on fossil fuels. So it's a high carbon emitter, both in terms of the continent and amongst the top 20 in the world. And that's a big enough reason for us to be seeing the need to transform our enterprises. And then from the sample, and you'll see it's not a huge sample, so if you wanted to ask the question, more needs to be done, it could be about whether do we need to take on a few more companies to look at, or try this out on a few more as we encounter them. But in essence, most, if not all, I'd say all companies said that they had to already adapt to climate change, especially over the past few years. All of them cited at least one, but I'd say most of them were able to cite examples of drought, of high temperature increases, and of flooding. And these are some of the physical things that actually force them to take action, their own survival, their own ability to survive the consequences of climate change. So apart from talking about what green economy means at large, it was just the fact that they were faced themselves with the real challenge. And I think if you wanted to talk about micro and medium-sized companies as opposed to your larger companies, hopefully you'd understand that a smaller company, it's a much harder ask to expect that they'd be able to recover once they've been flooded, or once they've hit droughts and there's no water to run their business, or they have power outages, etc. But yes, the other adaptation issues are financial, educational, and skills, and I'll talk a bit, well, let me say a bit more about that now. From the sample that we interviewed, we found that the, I suspect I've missed a slide, but I'll get back to it. We found that amongst the companies we interviewed, the issue of, sorry, I've lost my train of thought. Let me just find, on the issue of financial and education and skills, pardon me, I suspect I've missed, yes. Let's just see that, okay, I am on the right track. Let's go back then. So physical, I've mentioned. Financial and education and skills, I won't go into detail now. Let me come back to that one. High levels of poverty, unemployment, and inequality. When you look at the report, you'll note that comparatively to the other three countries, and of course we also note as a country that our levels of inequality are extreme. We don't do very well in terms of equality. So I think it's important to take note of that as we talk about the findings of the report. Core economic activities in the hands of large corporations. I think, again, you will know, I am missing a slide. So I just want to check if there it is. Okay, so I just want to be sure that I'm going to be able to show you what I'm talking about. Yes, with regard to the economy and the structural design of our country, we are dominated by large corporations. So my next slide, which I'll show you shortly, will show you where most of our smaller companies are. So that when we're talking about a just transition and when we're talking about a green transition, we actually have to be asking the question, are we targeting the smaller and medium-sized companies? And then with regard to opportunities, we are a highly industrialized country as South Africa on the continent, and I think we can pretty much carry quite a lot of weight in terms of the industries that dominate our landscape. And that ought to open up further opportunities for us to compete and also to do something meaningful in the green and just transition. In terms of our policy, which Sévane alluded to in the global report, we have a number, and these are not exhaustive, but we are aspiring in terms of our climate change policies, our clean energy policies, our transports, our integrated waste management policies, and these are all opportunities that could enhance the opportunity for us to green our enterprises and our workplaces. Just energy transition framework, I won't repeat what Jens has already said. I think he gave a great definition. And if you do look at the panel's definition, it's quite an extensive one, quite an interesting one, and one that perhaps I'd like to say, not their particular definition, but all our definitions, is that the challenge I think we all have, someone asked the question about awareness raising and communication. The challenge we have is getting lost in the semantics of words. And I did find that all the people that were interviewed for this research did not know what just transition meant. So they could talk to green transition, but there are reasons in some cases why they can't relate to just transition. Again, I'll come back to that. But how you define it will be different for different people, and they'll understand and comprehend it differently, depending also on where they are coming from and what their context is within their workplace. Workers' rights and human rights are enshrined. That is very true in terms of our policy landscape. But another interesting thing that probably I'm preempting is to say that from the sample of companies we interviewed, the highest level of unionization in those companies. Now, bear in mind, we're talking about small to medium-sized companies, and our medium in the South African context is it's quite a large company. It's actually not so small as one might think. And in their case, the highest level of unionization was 30%, which does beg the question that if you are talking about employees being involved in the just transition discussion, what are the avenues for their engagement? Are their bosses, are the employers open to those kinds of discussions? So just to come back to what I was starting to talk about already, was to give you a sense, hope you can see it, a sense of that structural economic landscape I was talking about, that largely we are dominated by very large enterprises. And that's important, and I'd like you to just think about that and what significance that holds for you. Also, I think it's important to note where are our small and medium-sized enterprise operating versus our much, much larger. And when I talk large, I'm talking about people who generate billions, really billions of rands in South African terms. So when we talk about green and just transition, we are talking about, you can see the first bar for each category is for 2013, and the second one is 2019. So you can see we're in places where there's been a small encroachment by small and medium enterprises into certain spaces, and maybe a retraction to some extent of larger businesses. But this is important because if these companies, small and medium companies, are not at the table to begin with, how then do we include them when we're talking about a just transition? Okay, I'm not going to repeat this because I suppose I've already touched on it, except just maybe, perhaps one or two key points here. That large firms, the second bullet, large firms enjoy greater representation and support from better resourced apex industry associations or enterprise business, what does the M stand for again? I forgot, member organizations, more resourced. And when I say more resourced, they have perhaps more money, they have more skilled people to be part of the discussions and engage with policies affecting the green and just transition. And I'm separating them because I felt people didn't really understand the word just. And we actually have to give this word just a lot more definition. When I say resourced, a question that was asked earlier was also to do with awareness raising and communication. And our findings here was that your smaller industry associations or EBMOs tend to be very, very thin when it comes to the ability to communicate. They operate on a very, very basic level. So they send emails and maybe an occasional newsletter, but the level of engagement amongst some of them is very, very low. And but there are some good examples as well. Again, I'll give you an example of such. Smaller firms are vertically integrated into the supply or value chains of larger firms. So for example, there's an example of a big retailer in the study. They've got many suppliers that sit in the small and medium-sized enterprises, and they actually have either the power to influence the behavior of those supply chain or to actually punish them. So people could be excluded if they don't meet the criteria for the kind of green credentials that that large enterprise might want, or they can play a constructive role in taking them along with them through training and so on. However, there's probably just a word of caution around that if companies do that, they would need to be cautious about encouraging anti-competitive behavior. Economic activities remain significantly under ownership, control, and management of white and male-dominated groups and networks. Now, I say this, I felt it was important to highlight this because we know the history of South Africa in terms of our whole dynamic, race relations, ownership, land ownership, all of those sort of things. But interestingly also for me was that all the companies that were interviewed were men. I think there were 2 black men and the rest were white men. So I've not, and I thank Catherine for and Sévane, sorry, for including gender equality, because those of you who know me, it's been part of my previous work as well, to be an ambassador for gender equality and gender inclusion and gender mainstreaming and all the other terminology you want to use. Now, the fact that, first of all, that the most of these medium-sized or small companies are owned and managed, and those are the people that were interviewed for this survey, are owned by men and a particular color of men, and that the employees are largely black employees and largely skilled, semi-skilled or unskilled. Again, for me, the question would be, is there, and then I picked up from the interviews that there wasn't always an appetite to engage because maybe people felt that, you know, I can't speak at that level or I'm not committed to this, but there were various reasons for that divide. Large enterprises are more directly exposed to government regulations and international trading requirements with a knock-on effect. So when we talk about carbon tax, which was the most cited piece of legislation that most companies responded to, that's what they fear. And it's like a big stick for them that the large company that they are part of the value chain is going to be whipped with the carbon tax stick. So it's going to come back and knock at their door. And hence they've got to green their business. So that is just an important point, I think, to highlight again regarding the economic landscape of the country. Now, the sample then included the Agribusiness Association, the Citrus Association, Agribusiness Advisory Service, a company that works a lot with advisory across various businesses, and then alcohol, beverage, farm cooperative. I won't go through all of those, you can read them for yourself, but you can see that essentially when it comes to the companies, we were looking at companies within the food processing value chain, the retail value chain, and the construction sector. Just another interesting point with regards to the construction sector. Construction sector, I understand, is under evolution. So it will now include architects and all sorts of other professional bodies and so on. Often we think of the big top 5, or we used to think about the big top 5. Here, this deep dive went straight into just one little part of the construction sector, which is the brick making sector. And even they are confused sometimes about where they belong, because they sometimes, some legislation that governs them includes mining, because they're seen as mining raw material, and then sometimes they're seen as being part of the construction sector. And so, of course, they get different pieces, sometimes even conflicting legislation that governs them. So what were the key findings from the work that we did? In terms of government policy and legislation, climate change, cleaner energy, and integrated waste management. And of course, climate change, partly because people were feeling the heat, pardon that pun, they were feeling it directly. There was one micro farmer who had two major incidents which almost destroyed his business. So he was hit by a tornado and his livestock were wiped out. So people have actually physically, you don't need to, those kind of companies didn't need to be persuaded that something is happening and it impacts on them directly. And then, of course, there's also the issue of new legislation coming in, like the extended producer program, which is starting to say, well, companies now must look at the cradle to cradle, I suppose, the circular economy sort of argument, and think about their products from beginning to end. And this was also seen, I think, as an opportunity by some companies. But when it comes to small and medium enterprises, there was less awareness or engagement with these policies. So the policies that they related to, and I think just about all of them mentioned, were a lot to do with energy, with the changing landscape of our energy policies, and a lot to do with the carbon tax, and those that were more directly impacted the extended producer program. Because I think in that case, they also saw opportunities for themselves. With regards to the business case, cost of energy is still a big issue across the board, whatever the size of the business. And then the availability of energy, and more so now in the current climate, both within our own country and globally, the extent to which we have security of supply is definitely something that companies feel very threatened by. And where they can, they are desperately looking at greener solutions. They also are affected by reputation, and reputation in the case of small and medium enterprises is what is their reputation, especially to whoever they are producing the goods for. The one association which was particularly influenced by reputation at a more international level was the Citrus Association, because 40% of the business is done with the EU, so they have to comply with the requirements of the EU, and that requires them to really up their game and make sure that they are responding to greening their operations. Business operations and continuity, a lot of these businesses are at risk of actually just disappearing if they're not careful. So for many of them, applying their minds to all these bigger issues is challenging, because just keeping their doors open and keeping the machines running is where they are at. And as I said, if you're knocked over by a tornado, I don't think you've got so much time to think about a lot more than that. I've already mentioned the issue of the export market. Most of the sample that we interviewed were supplying into a South African market, and they didn't seem to feel so much pressure as, for example, the Citrus Association did in terms of responding to green because of that kind of pressure. Information and awareness, firms which were more exposed to information and awareness about green government policies were more likely to make the transition. And I think the example that I've cited there with the clay brick sector in particular is that they've had quite a long-standing set of interventions. Initially, the Swiss contact, supported by the Swiss government, supported them, and it was hand-holding. It was a really hand-holding exercise. And now they've also just been supported by the Switch to Green Africa project that has been rolled up by the EU and UNEP. And that has assisted them greatly, because what was interesting in talking to them was that they were able to say, well, I can just, the technical support has been provided, I can just put my numbers in and spit out a sustainability report that tells me how I'm doing and how I can improve. But that took a lot of years of technical support, of financing, and so on. So when one talks about financing, supporting, involving your small enterprises, I think the need for that extended support is something to consider. I see Ian standing up, so I'll have to wrap it up. Technology and skills, I think here what many of the companies were saying was that we've got unskilled workers or semi-skilled workers we could do with more artisans, like more electricians, more qualified plumbers, if you're looking at water treatment and water management, whatever, you know, so technical skills at artisanal level was what quite a few of them were talking about. And then in terms of green finance, I know that Sévane alluded to it when he spoke about the administrative and legal burden. And that's how companies at this level feel, that it seems onerous. So even if there are government incentives, they feel that it's onerous to be able to apply for them, or there are strings attached. So depending on how companies feel about other areas of transformation, some of them said, I'd rather spend my own money. But what I can say is that most companies had allocated money, especially to spend in the short term with regard to their transition. I've already spoken to a lot of this, so I'm not going to say much to this. But the last point, I think, bears and requires emphasis. The fact that everybody, I remember I had to read through what the just transition meant. They did not know it. So they spoke very isolatedly about green transition without understanding how far this word just extended to. And these were the owner managers of the business. And bearing in mind, I said to you earlier, your workforce are largely perhaps less educated, less skilled, and maybe there's a bit of a cultural thing of, will they understand? Can I have this conversation? Do they care? So yes, I'm not saying that companies didn't take care of people from a workplace perspective, but there was a tendency to feel, you know, this is not something I can have a conversation. And anyway, the skill is in me. I, as the boss, already know, I know what I need to do, and I'll just get my workers to do it. So what are the key messages from what we looked at in South Africa? First of all, or we call it SMEs in the context of South Africa, they have already experienced the impacts of climate change. And I've already mentioned that while they can relate to aspects of what it means to be resource efficient, to look at water more carefully, to worry about biodiversity, etc., understanding how this translates into what's called a just transition is a challenge. And when it comes to workplaces, very few spoke about what were they thinking in terms of workplaces. Although, again, to cite the example of the Clay Brick Association, I know that some of them mentioned that where previously they were using old-fashioned equipment, the new technology resulted in their workers operating in a more decent fashion, less ash, because otherwise in the old technology they came out filled with ash, they had respiratory problems from all the dust. And so there was a lot more in terms of new technology that was actually improving the health and working conditions of their workers. EBMOs for SMEs are generally poorly resourced in being able to provide information, capacity, and support to their members. Now, again, to use the Clay Brick Association, if you look at their website, you'll see lots of reports and information that's regularly updated. But many other enterprise organizations were unable to say that they even have the manpower or person power to sit in any meetings and be educated about what they in turn must then educate their members on. But of course, there are other organizations besides industry sector organizations that are trying to reach out, and even government itself, where it sees the need, has engaged directly with some of those smaller companies. Governments and other social partners need to give more direct and accessible support to sorry, I'm used to saying SMEs, so SMEs, in terms of information, financial incentives, green finance. And the green finance, remember, that's not just talking from a government perspective, but also from a private sector perspective. So when you're talking in regard to private sector finance, the issue of, you know, how easy is it to access that finance? You know, people always talk about having a proper business plan, etc. But it's also about what you put up as collateral. and what is the threshold of lending. And your smaller companies tend to be very afraid of putting their farm up as a collateral, for example. Or banks are scared that I can't come and take this thing away from you once you install it. This energy efficient equipment, for example. So those are some of the issues around green finance, very practical issues that they are dealing with. And then collaborative efforts and technical support, similar to the one I mentioned in the case of the Clay Brick Association. But Colombia, if you look at the report, you also see their big program. Of course, the big program I've covered, that was my last slide. So even those online, you're not missing anything from me. I'd like to thank you for your attention, but I think I've come to the conclusion anyway of what I wanted to share with you about the South African spotlights. Thank you.
Please give a round of applause. Thank you very much, Valerie. I think that was a very excellent complimentary sort of deep dive into some I would say qualitative data, since it wasn't a very large sample, of course, but I think really you shone light on some of the key issues that especially small, micro, and medium-sized enterprises are facing, perhaps more the micro than the small than the medium-sized enterprise that are actually quite large in South Africa. So, so we have about 50 minutes left. Questions? So the cleaner production people want to start. So we have Julie, we have Janita, another. Can I get another hand? I think that's a question online as well. I saw a great question from Gary that I think fits into one of your findings about ESG dimension. So,
thanks. So I'm Julie Wells from the National Cleaner Production Centre. So the NCPC team over here, we had a couple of observations and questions in the last presentation, which we never got around to. So poor Val's going to now, like, you're going to have to answer us though. That's okay. So we noticed a couple of things in the report, which frankly were not 100% contradictory to what we've seen, but they didn't quite bear out what we have been seeing. Now, just to give you some context, the NCPC has assessed approximately 1,800 companies over the last sort of 15 or so years. We've done implementation in about 250 of those companies. And we were very surprised to see some of the data that came out around the fact that greening did not reduce costs, production costs. So we actually ran down a couple of questions over here. One of the things I'd like to chat to you about in lunch is, you know, how was that being worked out? So I think my first question here is, are we able to get access to some of this data? Because we'd like to very much compare it and add it to our data. We have years worth of data, and we weren't approached for any data in this survey, in this report. So that's sort of, we'd like to know why we weren't approached. Quite honestly, we've got a lot of data to share. And I think some of our data actually is a little bit contradictory to what we've seen. So it would be very nice to have a discussion about that. So I'd like to specifically ask, for those, what was the data sample? How many companies? Because we saw a slide with 11 companies. Was that it?
Yes. For South Africa, yes.
Ish.
Okay.
Okay.
Specific sectors.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. So that explains, I think, the discrepancies, because we're talking hundreds and possibly even thousands of companies that we deal with, whereas you're talking 11. So I think maybe some more conversation is needed on that. That would be greatly appreciated. Okay. Nothing more. And Baron's going to grab it from me before NCPC table relinquishes control.
Okay. So it's not that technical. I think Julia's tackled that. Two questions. I did notice that in the report, you're not really looking much at water efficiency and water use, and particularly the water aspect from an industrial aspect. In my space, in eco-industrial park work, water is critical. Okay, so first question. Second question, I did not notice under the policy interventions anything mentioned about resource efficiency or resource use. So less for South Africa, but really a global question. So are governments not looking at resource efficiency? I'm very surprised not to find particular policies about that. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I think we had a question here, Janita.
Thanks, Jens. Val, thank you for that presentation. Just two questions from my side. The first one is with regard to the carbon border adjustment. On one of your slides with regard to the exports, you indicated that obviously it would only impact manufactured goods, and you used the example of the citrus exports. I'm just curious with regard to the recent announcement from the EU with regard to the cold chain and how it would definitely impact that industry. And then on the second one, you mentioned the issue of technology and skills uptake, but you also indicated that SMMEs would invest in that particular space. From our experience, we found that because the SMMEs are owner-driven, they don't necessarily have the funds to invest in their employees with semi-skilled and unskilled labor. And as a result, they also have a fear that once the labor is skilled, they're going to look for better opportunities. So I'm just curious about the conflict there on the slide before that, because under your challenges, you indicate otherwise. Thanks.
Okay. All right, so I'll answer to, can I go ahead, Jens, or are you still taking questions?
Yes, but I think on the sample in South Africa, I think we need to explain how the data and the number of firms. I think that's a great question from Julie, because clearly, and I want to apologize, yes, we should have reached out to you.
Sorry, I had a short time to do the whole presentation, so I didn't go into the details of the methodology, but thank you for asking this important question. The quantitative results that I present in the report are from both two sources. One is Flash Eurobarometer data. This one focuses more on enterprise from Europe, of course. The other one, and especially that's where we derive the result from employment, for employment, for instance, is the World Bank Enterprise Survey. And this one encompasses a broader number of countries and regions, and it includes lower middle income country and upper middle income country, as well as high income countries. Most of these countries, I must say, are around Europe or the Mediterranean area. Unfortunately, in the World Bank Enterprise Survey, there was no country survey for South Africa. Aside from that, and maybe that will complement what Valerie will say, but we had conducted enterprise qualitative surveys in a sample of countries, and South Africa was part of this these surveys, as well as others, as Korea, Colombia, and a number of other. So this, in total, we had 6 country qualitative enterprise survey. Just to explain, for instance, so the information about the production cost and what the implementation of greening process implies on production costs. It can, so some enterprises, like around, I think, 1/3 in the figure, don't say that it increased, don't say that it decreased or has no impact on their production cost on average. And there are some variations, of course, across countries. The data from the Flash Eurobarometer, and one of the explanations for this absence of impact on production cost, or even that it decreased production cost, is what we call in research is a Porter hypothesis. Is that, to translate it, is that when you introduce innovations, it can have a positive impact on productivity of the company. And that's the main explanation that is generally put forward to explain the absence of impact of environmental intervention on costs at the enterprise level. Of course, if you have data sets, and if you want to share the data set, maybe linking with Jens, we can see if we can conduct together, if there is an opportunity to conduct a study more based on South Africa, which would be great to complement our data, of course. There was, I don't know if there was any other question. Well, I guess I answered most of them. Thank you.
Let's do that. Huh? Let's do a study together. Huh? Perhaps ILO and cleaner production center, I think that could be excellent. Looking at your data, and perhaps we can even look at, surveying more firms, looking at resource efficiency as well. So, Valerie, some of the other questions.
My answer to your question, Julie, is that because I didn't obviously have time to go into every single detail, because as I said, there were standardized questions, and those questions, for example, ask questions about water use, pollution. So all those points that you've raised, water efficiency and management, those questions were asked. And I wouldn't say that there was any disagreement that was all part of what companies were trying to address, and willingly so, because they saw the point. Because coming back to your first question about cost, that is one of the reasons that many of these companies are doing it. Apart from the fact that they've found themselves vulnerable to climate change impact, cost is important for them. So where they have those that, and that's why they were even prepared to they had plans in place to put some of their own money into, whether it was alternative energy or energy efficiency or better resource efficiency. But I wouldn't say that that was a gap. I'd say the extent to which they were prepared to do it was linked to finance, because some of them had big dreams about what they'd like to do. And their feeling was that, it was going to take too long to raise the finance themselves, and they needed some help to be able to execute some of that. And then as far as the employment relationship goes, many of them felt that if they did invest this money, part of it would be in technology. Yes, some of them did feel that there might be job losses, but some of them actually saw it as opportunities. But opportunities for their employees to be reskilled. Of course, it also would mean that they might have to bring in new skills, because their feeling was that, with newer technology, there would be a need for higher level skills as well. I can't really answer the question on the coal value chain. I don't know if any of my colleagues, Catherine or Sévane, because I'm not sure what the words are coming out from the EU around the coal chain, because everyone's buying coal from South Africa at the moment. Sorry? Cold, as in cold temperature. Oh, sorry. Oh, no, we didn't go into that level of detail, not for this study. I think our conversation with the association was on board, and even with the agriculture, we didn't go into a lot of detail. Ours were really focused, as I said, on standardized questions, and that answer came from speaking, specifically to companies about what were their drivers. And as I say, because most of them were supplying to a local market, they weren't as driven by those that were supplying either into large multinational companies or to an export market. Have I answered all your questions? Is there anything else?
Was it answered? Resource efficiency. I don't think you got your question answered, whether governments don't care about resource efficiency measures.
Is that a question directed at South Africa, or?
I think in general. Yeah, Sévane, did you pick up anything on that? Resource efficiency, where that's a policy area for governments.
Yeah, of course, resources for governments in general in the survey of legislation that we conducted, and that for which you have detailed in the report. It's more you need to look more at chapter 2 of the report, but of course, resource efficiencies and conservation at the workplace is one of the areas that are covered by the legislation. I don't know if.
All right, thanks. We are very close to closing, 12:14 on my watch, perhaps even 12:15. I think my watch is a bit behind. Any more burning questions? I know there's a question online. Perhaps we can take it over lunch, unless, Gary, do you want to unmute and ask your question around ESG, and then you actually have the opportunity to ask the final question. Gary?
Yeah, morning again, Jens. Hope you can hear me still.
We hear you loud and clear.
Oh, lovely. Yeah, I mean, just a kind of more of an observation than a question, really. We did a number of these sustainability trainings in East Africa, and one of the issues that came up in all of these different training sessions, we did them actually with I would say medium-sized companies and larger-sized companies rather than smaller companies, and even some that were kind of listed on stock exchanges and needed to adhere to ESG guidelines. But one of the issues that kind of came through was just some of the contradictions. And one specific example that stuck with me, I've stuck the example in the chat box, if you can look at it, was around cobalt extraction and some of the other activities in mining, which is considered a very negative endeavor in terms of environmental footprint. But then again, it's extremely important in terms of its input into electrical vehicles and other parts of green products. So I think there's some of these kind of contradictions that are in place that I think I suppose raise questions around I suppose the contradictions involved. I said it wasn't really a question, but just more of a comment. Thanks, Jens. Over.
It's a question of how green is green.
I think, Gary, this is a final perfect note, because that brings us into that thing that started the whole thing. What is just transition? So when we go into low carbon economies and we start digging out cobalt, when we have child labor in the Congo, is that just? No, it's not. So we need to get around that and find ways that whatever we do to meet environmental sustainability standards is not at the expense of fundamental principles of rights at work and decent work and human rights. I think that's very important. So I'm not going to try to, you want the final word, Sévane?
I don't know if I answered correctly to the question on resource efficiency, but in the data that we had from the World Bank Enterprise Survey, for instance, resource efficiency in terms of greening processes is one of the first answer given by enterprise in terms of process implemented, and after there are some it's the main one.
All right, thanks, fantastic. So I think this brings us to the end of our day. I think you deserve a report here at this table. Did you pick up a report? Because I think let's meet and discuss this further with the Cleaner Production Center. Valerie, thank you very much. Give her a round of applause, please. Give Sévane a round of applause. Give Catherine a round of applause, and all of you that participated here today. Now, before you go, you have to do one thing. There's no such thing as a free lunch, so you need to work for it. Huh? So pick out your phones again, and we want to ask you one question. And I'm just going to run this on your computer. So in one word, just one word, sort of our exit poll, describe how you feel here at the end of the seminar. Hungry? No. Tired? Bored? Excited? Hopeful? Oh, hopeful. Nice. Someone actually wrote hopeful. Interested. More people are interested. Motivated, hopeful, more hopeful. So the more people who write, this is like a word cloud, the more people who write the same word, the bigger it becomes. Huh? I see we have only 6 participants that have answered, so I think someone are also tired. Well, I just spent another minute. Enlightened, sustainable. Someone feels sustainable, that's great. Creative. Challenged, informed, knowledgeable, upskilled. Someone has been upskilled, fantastic. That's nice, that's nice. Wow, I think this is beautiful. So thank you very much, everyone. I think this is just the beginning of a long transition. I hope we don't get lost in the transition as a world, as a global community, but that we actually manage to make this transition into a new age that is more sustainable, that is more just, that is more socially inclusive. I think that's why many of the people that are here today, we work in this area, because this is important to us and it's meaningful. So So I want to thank you very much for coming. I want to thank all the participants that were online and kept staying with us. Catherine, thank you for joining us all the way from Geneva, and we had people from Zimbabwe. So thank you. I think this is the beginning of, I think, further discussion among us as partners in this very important area of greening enterprise in South Africa. And Janita and Leanne from the Department for Environment, thank you very much. We will also be talking to you for sure. So thank you, and I think this is it. Thank you very much. Give yourself a round of applause, and then lunches, some finger lunch and cool drinks are ready on the way out. So thank you.
Thank you, bye.
And bye everyone online. Enjoy your lunch, whatever it is. Please remember decent work. Have lunch, have a break.
Thank you. I thought you were going to share virtual lunch. Cheers, bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.